this lesson, let's make reading the news in English fun and educational. We're going to read an article from the New York Times together, and from this, you're going to improve all areas of your English. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. First, I'll read the headline. Locks of Beethoven's hair offer new clues to the mystery of his deafness. So let's talk about this. A lock of hair. Well, you can see it in the picture right here. This represents a lock of his hair. Now, a lock is just a section of hair. So it would be more than one individual piece, which you can't even see really. But one piece of hair is called a strand of hair. And hair doesn't take an S, is uncountable. So you could say, you have really thick hair, or, oh no, there's some hair in my food. So you can use some to say more than one, but you don't add an S to hair. I wrote that for you, and notice there is a way to make hair plural, but you don't make hair plural, you make the noun strand. Remember, one strand is one single hair, but you can say there are some strands, so you add the S on strand. There are some strands of hair in my food. So that's how you could emphasize the fact that it's plural, but this is a more natural thing to say. Oh no, there's some hair in my food. We've all experienced this. And remember, a lock is when you take a piece, but you would cut it off. So right now it's just hair. But if you take scissors, you cut it. And I think in the past, you might put a decorative ribbon on this, and it would be a keepsake or a momentum or something you give to a loved one or a family member. I don't think that is a tradition here anymore, but I believe it was in the past. So here it's plural because there was more than one group of Beethoven's hair. Now, these locks of hair, because locks is plural, these locks of hair offer new clues to the mystery of his deafness. Notice deafness, this is functioning as a noun and it belongs to him, his deafness. To describe someone, you would use the adjective deaf and the verb to be. He is deaf. Now, Beethoven is dead, so you change that to the past simple. He was deaf. So this is the adjective form and this is the noun form, his deafness. Don't worry about taking notes because I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. You can find the link in the description. Let's continue. Using powerful technologies, scientists found staggering amounts of lead and other toxic substances in the composer's hair. So let's pause there and let's look at staggering amounts. A staggering amount is a very high amount. You can use this in an everyday context, like describing the rain. There was a staggering amount of rain today. Or maybe I have a staggering amount of work to do this weekend or this week. Now, you can also use this as a reply to someone. We got 10 inches of rain today. Wow, that's staggering. That's a very high amount. So a very useful adjective to sound advanced. Staggering amounts of lead and other toxic substances. Notice the pronunciation here, as the metal is pronounced lead. Does that sound familiar to you? Because that's how you pronounce the past simple of the verb to lead, which has the same spelling as the metal lead. Let's see if you can get the correct pronunciations based on context. I always lead presentations because you lead a presentation. I always lead presentations on lead, on the metal, on lead. But yesterday, my colleague Led, the past simple of the verb lead, is pronounced like the metal, led. But yesterday, my colleague led the presentation on, this is easy, on lead. I'll read this one more time. I always lead presentations on lead, but yesterday my colleague led the presentation on lead. So you can practice that and maybe quiz your friends too. Lead and other toxic substances in the composer's hair. So the composer being Beethoven, that was his job title. He was a composer. In the composer's hair that may have come from wine or other sources. The use of may is important here because it suggests possibility but not fact. And notice may is a modal verb. So what do you notice here? What do you need grammatically? Modal plus base verb, may have. Now, what if I wanted to take this and make it sound like a fact, not a possibility? What would I say? In the composer's hair that came from wine. So if I use the past simple of the verb, the main verb here is come, have is the auxiliary, may is the modal. In the composer's hair that came from wine. That sounds like a completed past action, so it sounds like a fact. May have come is a possibility. Let's continue. These are the highest, what is this? What's the pronunciation? These are the highest lead values. So the value, the amount of the metal being lead, the highest lead values in hair I've ever seen, the Mayo Clinic added. Wow, that's staggering. This is the perfect time where you could reply and say, wow, that's staggering. The highest amount that this clinic has ever seen, wow, that's staggering. Are you enjoying this lesson? If you are, then I want to tell you about the Finally Fluent Academy. This is my premium training program where we study native English speakers from TV, the movies, YouTube, and the news so you can improve your listening skills of fast English, expand your vocabulary with natural expressions, and learn advanced grammar easily. Plus, you'll have me as your personal coach. You can look in the description for the link to learn more, or you can go to my website and click on Finally Fluent Academy. Now let's continue with our lesson. Beethoven's hair. Instead of hair, what could you say if you wanted to talk about a group or section of hair that was cut? Beethoven's locks. Now you could put it singular, lock of hair, which I have, but in the headline, it was plural. So we can say Beethoven's locks. The apostrophe S is to show possession, that the hair or the locks belong to Beethoven. And of course, I'm not going to add the S here because it's uncountable. Beethoven's hair also had arsenic. Arsenic. This is a chemical, poisonous chemical. Arsenic levels 13 times what is normal. Wow, that's staggering. You can use that adjective again. You could say Beethoven's hair also had staggering amounts of arsenic, or staggering levels, because they used the word level, staggering levels of arsenic. And mercury levels, mercury is a chemical element, mercury levels that were 4 times the normal amount. Also staggering. But the high amounts of lead in particular could have caused many of his ailments, Dr. Janetto said. Let's review the pronunciation here. Don't get confused by this beginning. Don't look at the word, just listen to my voice. Ailments, ailments. And an ailment is an illness or health problem, but it sounds more permanent and severe, generally used with the elderly, but of course, any age group can have ailments. My grandmother has many ailments. So this means my grandmother has many health problems or illnesses, and it sounds like they're more permanent. Let's look at in particular. Notice how this is between commas because you can remove this and the sentence would be grammatically correct. So I could say, but the high amounts of lead could have caused many of his ailments. In particular is focusing on lead. It's putting the importance on lead compared to the other things that were referenced. So here they referenced arsenic and mercury. So these affected Beethoven, but it was lead in particular that caused many of his ailments. So it's the one that the author wants you to pay attention to the most. Notice again, they said could have caused. This is easy for you now because you know that we have our modal, could, followed by the base verb, could have. And this is also used for possibility. So same thing we did before. If you want to state this as a fact, what would you say? But the high amounts of lead in particular caused. You would just take the past simple of the main verb. In this case, the verb is cause. Caused many of his ailments, and that would sound like a fact. Let's continue. The analysis updates a report from last year when the same team said Beethoven did not have lead poisoning. Now with thorough testing, thorough, listen to the pronunciation, thorough. Thorough means extensive, in depth, thorough testing. Practice that pronunciation, thorough. Now with thorough testing, they say that he had enough lead in his system to, at the very least, explain his deafness and illnesses. So instead of illnesses, you could say ailments. Remember that pronunciation, ailments. Ailments, illnesses. Because an illness also sounds like it's more permanent than, for example, just saying, oh, I have a cold. A cold, you get it and then you recover, but an illness could be more permanent. Let's look at the very least, because again, this is between two commas, so I can read it without. They say that he had enough lead in his system to explain his deafness and illnesses, including at the very least, it sounds like, well, it could explain more problems that he had, but it explains his deafness and explains his illnesses, and it's possible it explains other things as well. What those things are, I have no idea because the article didn't explain it. So I could say this lesson will help you improve your reading skills at the very least. So it sounds like you could also do other things. It could also help you expand your vocabulary, improve your pronunciation, fix your common grammar mistakes, learn advanced grammar, improve your confidence speaking, but it will improve your reading at the very least. And if you agree that this lesson could help you improve many areas of your English, or at the very least your reading, put that's right in the comments. Now let's continue. One likely source of Beethoven's high levels of lead was cheap wine. Oh, so this is the culprit. The culprit is what causes the lead, causes the something. So one likely source, this is what caused the lead. You could say one likely culprit, but we only use culprit for negative things, whereas a source could be used for positive things. One likely source of improving your English, becoming happier. So those are positive things, but culprit is when you identify something that causes a negative. So the source or the culprit of his high levels, his staggering levels of lead was cheap wine. Cheap in this case meaning inexpensive. But cheap is also used for quality and for price. you could say, oh, wow, that's really cheap. But it's possible that the quality of that item is still very high. It's just maybe there's a sale that makes the price cheap, inexpensive. But we also use cheap to describe the quality. Oh, this shirt is really cheap, which means that the material is not high quality, which I don't agree. This is not a cheap shirt, although it wasn't very expensive. So I would say the price was cheap, but the quality is not cheap. Lead in the form of lead acetate. I don't know what lead acetate is. Never heard this before. Now, lead acetate, also called lead sugar, has a sweet taste. Okay, so lead acetate is something that if you drink it, which you should not do, has a sweet taste. In Beethoven's time, it was often added to poor quality wine. So in this case, poor quality, I used the adjective inferior quality, but you can absolutely say poor quality. You could also say cheap wine to mean that the quality is poor. Poor quality, cheap wine to make it taste better. Oh, in Beethoven's time. This means in the time period that he was alive. And to be honest, I'm not sure when that was. I'm sure we don't do this anymore with wine, but in Beethoven's time, it was probably a common practice. Let's continue. Wine was also fermented in kettles soldered with lead. Don't let the spelling influence your pronunciation. So don't look at the word, listen to my voice. Soldered, ordered, soldered, soldered with lead. I only know this word because I've heard my husband use it, talking about soldering things together, which I understand is connecting them together. So to solder is when you take two pieces of metal, and if you want to form one piece, you solder them. So you basically glue them together. However, I am not an expert in this, but I will confirm that the pronunciation is solder, to solder. To solder, so the kettles soldered with lead. So the kettles that they used to ferment the wine were connected together, and the glue or material that they used to connect it together contained lead. Soldered with lead, which would leach out as the wine aged. Okay, so to leach out, so here we have our kettle, two pieces of the kettle, you connect it together, you solder it, so now it's one piece, and then around the seams, the points where the metal is connected, the seams, that is a glue-like material. So if it leaches out, it means it slowly is added. So it's slowly added to whatever it's in. And in this case, it's wine. So if this cup if there was lead paint on this cup, let's certainly hope there isn't. If it leached out, it would slowly add to my tea in this cup. Now, let's hope that isn't happening. Let's talk about would. First, it's a modal verb, so you need your base verb, leach out. This is a phrasal verb, so you have your verb and preposition. Notice that pronunciation, each, leach, leach out. In this case, would is used to talk about a habitual past action. So an action that happened in the past, but it happened repeatedly, habitually. For example, in Beethoven's time, they would add lead to wine. So they did this repeatedly, but it's in the past. You could also say in Beethoven's time, they added lead to wine, but this is unclear if it just happened once or if it was a habitual. So if you want to make it clear that it's a habitual, you can use would add in the past. And corks on wine bottles were pre-soaked in lead salt to improve the seal. Aren't we lucky that we didn't grow up in Beethoven's time? Pre-soaked, so if you soak something, you put it in water for a period of time. And they did this before they put the cork, the top, on the wine bottle. Beethoven drank copious amounts of wine. Listen to the pronunciation, copious. So not cop, it's copious, copious amounts of wine. Copious means large amounts, but it also means more than enough. So it has more of a negative sound to it, where staggering can be used positively. Our sales are staggering, so very high. And that's positive, of course. In this case, I would replace it with the word excessive, which also has that negative sound to it because it's more than enough. The rain was staggering, but maybe you needed a lot of rain. The rain was excessive, too much rain, more than you wanted. Beethoven drank copious amounts of wine, about a bottle a day. So this gives you an example of how much. And later in his life, even more. Wow. Believing it was good for his health. So he had a reason. He thought it was good for him. And also because he had become addicted to it. Oh, so not a positive reason here. He had become addicted to it. This is our past perfect because we're talking about a past before another past. In the last few days before his death at age 56 in 1827. So this is in Beethoven's time, in the 1820s. That's how you could represent it. You could say 1827, but that's the specific age he was when he died. So I guess you would go 50 years early to talk about when he was born, but you could say in the 1820s, the early 1800s, you could express it like that. His friends gave him wine by the spoonful. So they had a spoon and they gave him wine by the spoonful, likely because he was too sick to drink it himself. So before his death at age 56. To say this in a standard sentence, you would say he died, the past simple. He died when he was 56. You can end it there. Many native speakers will. Or you can say years. There's an S on years. Years old. He died when he was 56. He died when he was 56 years old. Both are correct. Over the years, Beethoven consulted many doctors, trying treatment after treatment for his ailments. Remember that pronunciation, ailments, illnesses, health problems that are more permanent, his ailments, and his deafness. We talked about this, the noun form of to be deaf, his deafness, but found no relief. At one point, he was using ointments. An ointment is a medical cream that you apply to your skin, and then you could rub it in. So that would be an ointment. So it's just in a cream or gel or liquid form. Using ointments and taking 75 medicines, because plural here for 75, many of which most likely contained lead. Poor Beethoven. And thank goodness we didn't grow up in the early 1800s for obvious reasons and for many different reasons. Let's look at the pronunciation of this. Ointment, oin. So a very nasal sound, kind of like a pig makes. Ointments, ointments. So the end here is more of a mint, and then plural, ointments. Now, I paused at medicines originally and said it's plural because it sounded a little weird to me, and I just
searched it, and previously it was very common to say medicines, and likely because they're talking about Beethoven's time, maybe that's why they use medicines, because in his time, it could have been the choice. But today, I would say medications, and I know that would be commonly used in North America. Medicine is used in more of a general sense, so I might ask my husband, oh, do we have any medicine? Do we have any pills with medical ingredients? Do we have any medicine? I have a headache. Do we have any medicine? But a medication is a specific medicine prescribed by a doctor to treat a specific illness. But medicine is just a more general terminology. The doctor prescribed 2 medications. So although this was understandable, I did pause and read it again because it sounded a little odd to me. So in common North American usage, we use medicine in a more general context and medication to talk about something specific a doctor prescribed to you. And that is the end of our article. So what I'll do now is I'll read the article and from start to finish. And this time you can focus on my pronunciation because we did have a lot of interesting pronunciation in this article. So let's do that now. Locks of Beethoven's hair offer new clues to the mystery of his deafness. Using powerful technologies, scientists found staggering amounts of lead and other toxic substances in the composer's hair that may have come from wine or other sources. These are the highest lead values in hair I've ever seen, the Mayo Clinic added. Beethoven's hair also had arsenic levels 13 times what is normal and mercury levels that were 4 times the normal amount. But the high amounts of lead, in particular, could have caused many of his ailments, Dr. Janetto said. The analysis updates a report from last year when the same team said Beethoven did not have lead poisoning. Now, with thorough testing, they say that he had enough lead in his system to, at the very least, explain his deafness and illnesses. One likely source of Beethoven's high levels of lead was cheap wine. Lead, in the form of lead acetate, also called lead sugar, has a sweet taste. In Beethoven's time, it was often added to poor quality wine to make it taste better. Wine was also fermented in kettles soldered with lead, which would leach out as the wine aged. And corks on wine bottles were pre-soaked in lead salt to improve the seal. Beethoven drank copious amounts of wine, about a bottle a day, and later in his life even more, believing it was good for his health, and also because he had become addicted to it. In the last few days before his death at age 56 in 1827, his friends gave him wine by the spoonful. Over the years, Beethoven consulted many doctors, trying treatment after treatment for his ailments and his deafness, but found no relief. At one point, he was using ointments and taking 75 medicines, many of which most likely contained lead.
Did you enjoy this lesson? Do you want me to make more lessons just like this? If you do, put more in the comments below. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And you can keep improving your English with this lesson right now.